Hello, all you wonderful Authors Love Readers podcast listeners out there. I'm so happy that you're here. Before this episode starts, I want to talk a little bit about Patreon. And the first thing I want to say is we have a charter Patreon supporter, Linda D. I'm so excited that we have a Patreon supporter and that she was the one who broke the ice and started us. And amazingly, then we have two more supporters who came right behind her. We have Jennifer S. and Laura D. We hope more of you will join Lisa, Jennifer, and Laura in becoming a Patreon supporter of Authors Love Readers podcast. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm asking for your support of the podcast through Patreon donations. Let me tell you, it's really hard for me to ask. As my friends would tell you, I'm not good at asking for help at all. The reason that I set up for the Authors Love Readers podcast, it is not for me as an individual author. It's strictly for the podcast. I would love for the podcast to become self-supporting because I've been supporting it to this point. The expenses include having the podcasts edited, because you'll be surprised to know we talk longer than you actually listen. And I have a monthly fee for hosting the files because these are big files. And what I would love is to have people donate, a couple dollars a month would be terrific. So that would be the way I could keep the podcast going on. And I hope you'll consider that. Thank you. Hi, this is Patricia McLinn, your host for Authors Love Readers podcast. As you know, we record a lot more content than can ever make it into the episode. I ask more questions than the guests can answer in a compact time frame. So our editors save these extra conversations that don't fit into the regular show. So I hope you enjoy it. In this episode, we're going to get deeper into our conversation with Anne Charles and give you pieces that we could not include in the original episode. Anne is a USA Today bestselling author who writes award-winning mysteries that are splashed with humor, romance, paranormal, and whatever else sounds like fun. She and I really connected with our interest in the West and loving that area of the country. So have a listen. Now, one of the things, like in the Deadwood, you use legends from other cultures. Do you then stick to their rules, kind of, or are you? And the same thing with the Mayan. Are you constrained by what they, in fact, believed, or what their legends were, or do you feel that you can morph them to either the story needs or your whim?
Well, because so much is legend, folklore, myth, I'll take elements of what is believed, what's pretty firmly believed, and pull that into my world and then tweak it, because really it's only what has been passed down. And we know as humans, things passed down verbally aren't always totally accurate, It changes with every generation on what really happens. So I try to keep some of it to give the readers, if they were to look up, one of the creatures or something I mentioned, they'll read and see, oh yeah, it's what Anne talked about. But then I morph things somewhat to fit my story and what I need to accomplish and what's happening.
Okay, so a little both, really.
Yeah, that's the beauty of fiction, in my mind. I get to play God and choose how much to use and how much not. But, one of the things with the Deadwood series and the Maya series, I really try to, when it comes to history that we do know for certain, I don't toy with that. I try to keep that accurate to what I've found in the history books. And I'll check multiple sources so that while you're being entertained with the stories, you're also learning things about Deadwood and its history, or the Maya people and what they believed and did. So I try to incorporate truth with my history as well as fiction.
I had a fascinating conversation with a park ranger who was at a historical site, actually in St. Louis, and will never forget him saying, because I was working on a historical romance, and he said, You know, the difference is, as a historian, I have to say what did happen. And as a fiction writer, you need to say what could have happened. And I thought,
Right.
yeah, he just got it. That's totally right.
That's the fun.
Yeah. So
Right.
we can't, as fiction writers, I don't think, I guess unless you're doing alternative history, but if you're presenting it as kind of the real world, you have to keep the real history that we know, but there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And that's where,
Right.
as fiction writers, can play.
Well, and being that it's set in real world in Deadwood, and I use real Deadwood for a lot of the setting. The library is the library. You know, there's the South Dakota room is in the library. It's a real place, and I use that in my stories. Public buildings, the rec center, the police station, things like that, the courthouse, those are the real buildings, and I will try to be as accurate as I can, as well as streets, neighborhoods, all that stuff. And I went into this knowing what I included for real history and real buildings and setting. I had to be as accurate as I could because my mom lives there and she grocery shops at the store. Yeah. And she gets stopped all the time and they talk to her about it. And I knew, and she's a very social person. And I knew if I botched it up, my mother was going to kill me because she would forever hear how her daughter screwed everything up. And they would chew on her and she'd come home from the grocery store and call me every time. And I'd never hear the end of it. So it was important from the start that I be as accurate on truth, true history and, reality, the buildings there and streets as I could. And I actually ended up working by book 2 or 3 with a local who'd been there all her life. Her brother's a historian up in Lead, and she helps me. She reads him early to make sure I have the right tree in front of the courthouse. It's not this, it's a cottonwood, or it's not a cottonwood, it's such and such. That is so important for the locals to make them want to embrace the story and not boo me out of town.
That's really interesting. Is I decided to create a fictional county. I added a county to Wyoming, and with a fictional town in it. And I've gotten a couple emails going, I'm trying to follow your geography, but I don't see that. I don't see that. And as it turns out, I didn't realize it until after I'd started it. I named it Sherman. There is actually a ghost town named Sherman, but it's not where I've located my area. And part of the reason I did that was I knew Wyoming's the least populated state in the country, and I'm merrily depopulating it with these mysteries. And I thought, I don't want to pick on one county. I don't want to do that to them.
Yeah.
And I also didn't want, and I'm curious if you run into this, like if you talk about law enforcement in the town, do you get any pushback or any comments from the real law enforcement?
Not so far. And one of my main characters is a detective that works for both City of Deadwood and Lead. And he's well liked among most. He's pretty snarly at times, being, a mad detective because he's got all these unsolved cases that are paranormal. That's crazy stuff to him, right? But I purposely, I wanted to have somebody that was in the force on the crew, of the main characters, because it was important to me that be there now. And then I thought, don't botch that up. You don't want to be getting speeding tickets every time you're in Deadwood because you made them all mad. Right. So, I really haven't heard anything from the law enforcement so far. And being like my characters in my Jackrabbit book, the dysfunctional sisters family, they're always in jail. I do try to, keep my head low when the law drives by. Oh, that's not me. I'm not Ann Charles. I don't know who she is.
Must be somebody else.
But it must be somebody else. Yeah. It's fun with the locals that know the buildings, because what I've gotten to, one of the things that's a huge thing I love and a benefit is I'm able a lot of times to tour some of the older buildings now in Deadwood that I was there as a kid. I grew up, my mom had moved there when I was in 7th grade. So I used to sit on the street, not on the street, but on the bench by the street, Main Street, and look at all these, across at where the brothels were and the different, old buildings and wonder what was upstairs. Well, because I write about, so much now, I'm fortunate to get to take tours a lot of times of buildings with locals. And it's just been amazing to get to do that. And I have fun with the locals that have also been up in some of these buildings. And they'll go, you were up there. I know, because you included, this in it. And that's really up there. So that's one of the things I love about the Deadwood series is it's opened up doors for me that as a kid I dreamed about being able to do.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I do include pieces from real places in Wyoming, but people would have to they'd have to know a lot of different spots in Wyoming to put together my fictional Sherman.
When newer writers ask me, do you recommend I use an existing town or create my own? And I often say, if you're going to use an existing, you better go there, and you better find a local that knows the history and knows it well, because you don't want to screw it up. You want the locals to be proud of it, not something they, want to burn when they see it because it's so wrong about their town. And you want to show them in a fun light. It doesn't always have to be everything's happy and rosy, but they're wonderful people, and they're, and this is where they live. And so there's a lot to consider if you're ever going to use a real place.
Absolutely. Okay, another question from a reader. This one is very intriguing. If you could write a book with any other author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
I would actually go back. I'm a big fan of Zane Grey.
Oh.
Westerns.
Yeah.
I read a lot. I read a variety of stuff, but majority of what I read, I go back and forth between Westerns and romance. You'd think I'd read a lot of mystery, but I don't, because I write it, I think. And so that makes me get my fill of that. But I love Westerns. I don't know what it is about him. Since a kid, I'm John Wayne, huge fan. I go back in time. It's always been Westerns. So his ability his descriptions are just so, he's wordy, a lot of people will say, but I love the description. And he was raised back during, he knew guys that were cowboys, I'm sure. So I love to read his work too, because I feel like I'm getting a real taste of what used to be said and how they said it, more so than those of us now trying to write Western, which I know a lot of authors try to really do a great job, and I'm sure they do. But because their audience is this day and age, I don't think they can write how it was actually said, or it would be hard to understand.
Yes. I've read a couple books that were memoirs by guys who'd been cowboys, usually in the 1880s, 1870s. And some of it was cleaned up. And yet there is such distinct language and so vivid. I just love it.
It's amazing when I read it. And plus the thing I like about Zane, I like Louis L'Amour too, don't get me wrong. But what I like about Zane Grey is I like the way he writes women. He had or whoever was helping him, editing, whatever, he fleshes out women more, and he gives women more personality and more spirit. And they're not just a female there with them. They have emotions, and he's more true to, I think, the females.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to go back and reread some and compare it to Louis L'Amour.
L'Amour's easier to read. You whip through them a lot quicker. Zane Grey is more meaty and heavy, and it takes more. But I do love his stories, just a little bit more than some of Louis'.
As we've talked about, these conversations run longer than we can leave in a single episode. So we're always challenging our editors how to make too much fit into one space. And thankfully, they hold on to these extra pieces for these sorts of episodes. So now we're going to jump into the middle of a conversation that Ann Charles and I had about deadlines and organization habits. Deadlines I like, organization not so much. So let's hear what we had to say about that. So you clearly are better about adhering to your own deadlines. I have to have pre-orders up and or have told the readers what I'm going to do in order to have it count as a deadline. Telling it to myself knows it's a joke.
It's like, right.
Exactly. We'll weasel out of it. But
Right.
I unfortunately this past summer had to push back a pre-order by 12 days. First time in 45 plus books I have ever missed deadline because my dog had surgery and had a couple setbacks during it. So I was canine nursemaid for a while. And now she's going to have another surgery. So I'm trying to keep things a little looser right now, but I'm afraid I won't produce. So how do you keep yourself writing when you don't have an external deadline?
It's more, my husband, we joke about, I say I'm self-driven. I'm just self-driven. Sometimes he says, obsessive. There's just, I get something set in my mind, and it's always been this way. And sometimes it's a problem for everybody else involved. That I get a date in my mind of when this is going to go. And I will move mountains on my end to make it happen. And everyone else just doesn't like me nagging them and pestering them. So they, do their parts and get their parts done per the deadline that I set. And I have a lot of different, not a lot. I have several people doing parts of stuff. For example, I said my brother's the cover artist.
Yeah.
So he has to have cover art to me in plenty of time for the cover design. And my husband does cover design. So he's got to take the art, scan it in, and then do all the behind the scenes work, building that cover and all the work that goes into that. And he's got to have plenty of time. So I have a process sheet that I really kind of make sure everybody's doing their parts to get stuff done.
Oh my gosh, you
time.
mentioned a process sheet earlier. I thought you were kidding.
No, I have to, especially like right now I'm working on 4 projects at once. So without the process sheet, I'm going to lose my mind about what comes next, and keeping it all straight. Plus I have my wonderful assistant who helps me with all the promotion and the ads and getting stuff going and parts of it like that. So I have to pick a date and stay true to it so that everybody around me works to that date. And I always kind of feel like if I drop the ball, well, what's everybody going to think? Gosh, she can't even follow through with what she says. So part of that drives me as well. And in the past, I used to do pre-orders, but I stopped because, the pressure. And a situation like what you ran into, having to push it back was a nightmare for me if I ever had to do that. It was just, that's too stressful. So I ended up stopping, no longer doing pre-orders because it gives me a freeing sense that I don't have to hit that date. I can be, I can make it 2 days later if something comes up.
Yeah, but then I would make it 2 days later or 4 days. How about a week and a half?
You remind me of my brother. I'll say, do you have the art? Do you have those illustrations done? And he'll say, I work best under pressure. Then I have to pressure. And I always joke about, do I have to call mom? Do I, get this stuff from you? Mom, he's not doing it. What he said he would. So we have fun with that. But he's really wonderful to work with and so fun to brainstorm and come up with stuff. And then my husband is incredibly patient with me as I stand over his shoulder, move it up just a little. No, move it down. No, I don't like that. And then, he does a lot of the pre-work just to get it ready for me to stand over his shoulder too. So I don't know. I don't know how they all.
Yeah, my wonderful cover designer knows the technical terms. Smidge. Move it a smidge.
Right, move it a smidge. I run it through from start to end. It's all me doing, the whole process. So I just think it's important to, where I can, seem organized where I can. Because in story, I'm not. I'm all over the place.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. To control kind of where you can. Yeah. Do your books change a lot on you from when you first have the concept to when it's finished?
You know, I wish I could tell you no, that I really have my act together. But yes, they do. A friend of mine once, an author friend, she said, you sit there chapter after chapter and line the mantle with loaded shotguns. And then you pick, it seems like at the end, which ones you want to pull down and shoot. And that's really how it feels. I go through the first half of the book and I have ideas of what I'm aiming for, major turning points. And I just sit there loading up the mantle with possibilities. And then a lot of times it takes to about midpoint for me to fully see how this puppy's going to come back around based on what I've done, what I've loaded up on the mantle.
We should explain to the readers, it's Chekhov, isn't it? It says that if you have a loaded pistol on the mantle in Act 1, it needs to have been shot by Act 3. And so that's
right.
I'm pretty sure it's Chekhov, famous writing saying. So you're talking about, but you're not satisfied with, well, actually, he probably said revolvers, not pistol. Not satisfied with a handgun, you're putting the shotgun up there.
I need the shotgun for the widespread, just in case. And then, once I finish, I do sometimes have to go back in and take some of those down off the mantle that I didn't end up using. Some of them stay in as red herrings, but I try to let it be organic because it entertains me then. I find as I write it, I'm entertained and surprised and, oh no, what's going to happen and how will this work out? And I hope that comes across for the reader as well, that, it gives it more emotion, more surprise, more angst, more laughter.
That's one of the reasons I need deadlines, because I could see all those shotguns lined up on the mantle and not want to pick. I don't want to close off possibilities. And so it's only when I have a deadline, and you've got to make a decision and get rid of some and fulfill others. And then I will. Okay, how about finding editing errors? A reader asks how much it bothers us after the book goes live.
I hate if that comes out. Because I'm indie, and I know the reputation indies have, has gotten with, oh, they're rotten, their editing's horrible. I go over, just the regular having an editor, and I have a wonderful editor. She's great. But I also know when I incorporate her edits, I will put double, the twice sometimes and not catch it. So, I have a multi-tiered. I do chapter by chapter as I write them. It goes to my first draft crew of about 13, and they read it as I'm writing story, which makes them very frustrated at times. If I take an extra week to write a chapter, they're like, come on, hurry up, get the next chapter. You left us hanging. They're very patient overall, but they give me first edits. I incorporate all that. I go back through it again, polishing, send it off to my editor. She does her magic, sends it back. I put it all in, read it again, try to polish, have the local for the Deadwood series, she reads it, tries to find anything, get it back, polished up, send it out to a beta crew I have. It's around 40 to 45 people that have tried and true over years of testing, and using different, these guys are the diehards that are really helpful, really good, finding all the little last things. And they come back and I incorporate all those edits, read it one more time with the help of my story Bible keeper, story world keeper. She does her part, looks at it, makes sure we got everything right. We haven't left anything. We didn't change eye color or car color. And then it goes out. And so if someone comes through with an error, it's just like, how did it get through 50 sets of eyes? Oh my. Yeah. It's crazy that it got
and
through.
Stuff and I just want to beat my head on the table.
It does. Yeah. It's and you just go, but with the digital world, it's so nice.
Isn't it?
Okay. I'll fix that.
Yeah. It is, it might have saved many authors' lives or sanity anyhow.
Definitely. Definitely. I'm not that great at grammar. So I always get a little better with each book, but still I need an editor. I really do. I need I need a proof editor, and that's what my editor does. And then I need my, the story world keeper is big because she helps. She goes, you already had this happen back in book such and such. And I'm like, oh, dope. So it all works together, especially when you get, when you have a series, it's tough to remember.
I'm envying you that. I'm thinking that's all in my head. I hold that all in my head.
If you ever need her, she does it for other authors. Oh. So let me know and I'll send you her info. She's great. And it's all in OneNote. And I just have the file open all the time while I'm writing and go, what did so-and-so use? What was her nickname by so-and-so? This character always calls her this. And I can go look it up. And it makes a huge difference, the details. Because most people don't read my books once every year half year when they come out. Most people binge read. And when you binge read, you catch all those inconsistencies. Yep. So it's so important for me to have the consistency. I'm spot on that.
Well, we'll talk. That's all for this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it and that you will join us for the next episode. In the meantime, I'm wishing you lots of happy reading.